This is things I wish I could say in Sunday school. I want to share some thoughts and ideas that are different than what we usually hear. My goal is to be really honest rather than inherently faith-promoting. I hope these ideas may spark some interesting discussions with your friends, families, or classes. Please enjoy. This is the lesson for February 16th through 22nd and February 23rd through March 1st. Genesis chapters 12 through 23 and Abraham chapters 1 and 2. Today's topics are the Abrahamic covenant, unfulfilled desires, and sacrificing Isaac. I'm going to cover both Abraham lessons in this episode. The manual hits up the Abrahamic covenant pretty hard. Key points of the covenant are it's everlasting, there's promised land, Abraham will have numerous descendants, and through Abraham all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Jewish people tend to focus on the promised land part. Christians, if they put any stock in it, focus on Jesus being born from Abraham's lineage, and Jesus blesses the whole earth. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints says that anyone who is baptized into the church becomes the seed of Abraham and a partaker of the Abrahamic covenant. They go so far as to assign everyone who receives a patriarchal blessing to a tribe of Israel. When I sit down and think about the Abrahamic covenant carefully, I see two big problems. First, as it's applied today, the covenant is so general it's meaningless. The promised land portion is fairly specific, but actually believing in that is super problematic. We can see that historically with the country of Israel, but also with the Crusades and colonialism in general. I don't see God preserving any land for a people's inheritance, in spite of how often that's promised in Scripture. Creating the state of Israel as reparations for the Holocaust has created its own horrible set of additional issues that will not resolve. It's really sad. If you feel entitled to something, then whatever you do to attain or maintain it can be justified. It compromises morals. While the promised land part is specific, I don't see good in it. The other parts of the covenant are super general. It can be boiled down to if you follow God, you'll be blessed. For the everlasting part, the manual says that the Abrahamic covenant is the same basic covenant made with Adam and Eve, but that also means it's the same general covenant outlined for all people and generations. For me, that squanders any specialness to the Abrahamic covenant. The second major issue with the Abrahamic covenant is that it's elitist. People who believe they are partakers of the covenant often feel like God favors them over God's other children. I don't believe that God favors some over others. I think the prevailing ideas that we're all children of God, and God is no respecter of persons, and that our heavenly parents are good, make a much stronger argument than other doctrines and ideas where God has special favorite children and then the rest. There's also the issue of how people behave when they believe they have God's favor. It's usually not good. The manual put emphasis on Abraham's posterity being a blessing to the nations of the earth rather than receiving blessings. But my observations over my life is that the vast majority of people who believe they have God's favor focus more on what they deserve than how they can lift others up. And ultimately, I just don't believe in God's sanctioned superiority in any way. Which kind of segues into my next topic, Abraham and Sarah's unfulfilled desire for children. Reading through Genesis this time, I cannot get over how Hagar was treated. I know that there were slaves and servants were also treated as a separate class of people. I just have a problem with God condoning it in this and all stories. Sarah and Abraham treated Hagar as a possession, not as a person. They forced Hagar to have sex with Abraham and get pregnant. Then the baby was much more Sarah's than Hagar's. After Hagar was pregnant, Sarah was also extra mean to her. Hagar ran away, and then it says an angel of the Lord visited Hagar and told her to go back and submit to Sarah. Part of the story is that God is complicit in Hagar's mistreatment. Nobody, including God, cared because she was only a side character. Such nonsense. I felt like I had to point this stuff out because it's another example in the scriptures of God's sanctioned superiority. God placing some people above other people. This stuff does not mesh at all with who I understand my heavenly parents to be. I really want to discuss unfulfilled desires. Abraham and Sarah are a classic example of people who really want something that wasn't materializing for them. It seems like they were doing everything they could to have kids, but it's something that isn't really in their control. It was really painful to not get what they want year after year after year, especially because they know that other people have kids so much more easily. It's also further complicated because God promised them posterity. I think a lot of people relate to these feelings. For me, it kind of ruins the story that ultimately they get what they want. Their desires are fulfilled. Getting what they want in the end is more classic storytelling. I just think it would be a braver narrative to subvert that expectation. I think what Sarah did was very interesting. She couldn't just wait and hope anymore, so she pursued an alternate plan. I think Sarah was very brave to do that. I think she treated Hagar horribly, but admires Sarah's courage in taking action. Abraham was much more passive. Sarah carefully considered her options, and though none were ideal, she chose what seemed like the best of her not great alternatives. Now I want to think about what if Isaac was never born? If Abraham and Sarah never had a child born to them together, do you think they would regret putting their faith in God if they never got what they wanted? Do you think they would regret some of their life choices since things didn't work out how they hoped? My answer to those questions is maybe. This is something that people wrestle with all the time. Things aren't working out how I hoped. What do I do? Ultimately, we can only control ourselves. How we respond to what happens to us and the choices we make for how to move forward. It's hard to see that clearly when we're in the midst of the pains of life. Another thing that bothers me is what this story says about God. Abraham and Sarah devote themselves to God. God promises them children and then withholds delivering on what he promised. We tend to justify God's role in the story that Abraham and Sarah needed to be tested, and God did deliver in the end. But did they really need to be tested? And just because in the end they got Isaac, it doesn't take away the years and decades of pain while not receiving the promised posterity. I don't like Abraham's version of God. It doesn't mesh with my perspective on my heavenly parents. I don't think our heavenly parents withhold to test their children. That's really awful parenting. The last topic I'm going to cover is sacrificing Isaac. I hate this story. It has never felt like a good story to me, but since becoming a parent, I really can't stand it. God commands Abraham to kill his son Isaac as a sacrifice to God. Super messed up. A loving God doesn't do this. I shouldn't have to say this, but God doesn't want us to kill people, especially children. Then Abraham actually goes to do it. This is all a huge no for me. We retell the story over and over again, emphasizing little kernels of goodness without acknowledging the abject horror that is the main plot. People like the parallel between Abraham sacrificing Isaac and God sacrificing Jesus. They like to talk about how strong Abraham's faith is. I see it as Abraham's complete lack of a moral compass. If God told me to sacrifice my child, I would say never. If our mortal life is our time to learn what goodness really is and to practice choosing good, then we absolutely disobey commandments that are wrong. Then I ask myself, what is the point of this story? My answer is that the goal of the story is for people to place faith and devotion over reasonable sense. I hate it, but I understand why the men in power would perpetuate this story generation after generation. Devotion benefits men in power. Do not devote yourself to anything to this degree. Abraham was a radical. That's not good. It's dangerous. We see the harm that radicals cause to the rest of us in our world all the time. I can't help but think about men who are part of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who have taken this and other stories to heart and became radicalized. Josh Powell was the first to come to mind. He murdered his wife and later his kids and himself. You can Google Josh and Susan Powell to learn more if you want. There's also Chad Daybell. Under the Banner of Heaven is the story of the Lafferty brothers. They murdered their sister-in-law and baby niece. And there are other examples we could list of men affiliated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who radicalized and justified murder, even the murder of children, because of their screwed-up religious beliefs. Meanwhile, we teach that Abraham was a great man in church, chosen in the pre-existence. We hold him up as possibly the greatest example of obedience. And he almost murdered his own son because he thought God told him to. This sounds much more like religious psychosis than righteousness to me. But we never mention at church how extremely messed up this story is. We revere Abraham instead of seeing him as a monster willing to murder his own child. It's a bad story. I don't think we're doing ourselves or anyone any favors by ignoring how disturbing the story of Abraham almost sacrificing Isaac really is. We need to acknowledge that it's horrific and unacceptable that previous generations taught that obedience to God was ever a justification for evil like this. I know that it also means there's fallibility in Bible stories, and that's hard for some people to cope with, but it's the truth. And ignoring the truth about how religious stories teach wrong ideas isn't helping anyone. That's it for this week. Thanks for listening. Please share with family and friends. Until next time.